Welcome back to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and Mr. Taylor, whose writings on the industry you can regularly read over on The Wrap, and whose musings on the Mission Impossible movies you can listen to on Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. He and I are recording this week's show on Wednesday, July 17th, 2024. It is Disneyland's 69th birthday, and we are also 1 week out from preview night for this year's San Diego Comic Con. And Drew, are we headed back down this year to that?
I will be actually hosting a panel this year, Jim.
Oh.
I know that this is a shock to you because I am doing this all the time.
Hosting a panel. Oh my God.
I know.
Okay.
It's out of the realm of possibility. Mm-hmm. But I encourage everybody who's still there on Sunday to stop by the Jurassic World Chaos Theory panel hosted by none other than yours truly.
How cool.
So I think it's going to be really fun. We're going to have a lot of the cast there. Right. It's sort of an interesting homecoming, too, because Camp Cretaceous all came out during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so this is like a nice kind of celebration of the series up until this point. We are going to show an episode from season 2. Mm-hmm. So if that's not enough of a draw, but I think it's going to be really, really fun. So, yeah, please come by.
Well, I think I don't think people understand what a big deal Camp Cretaceous is. I mean, just today I was in Target and they had an end cap.
Wait, we need to have a piece of music to accompany your Target stories.
Well, I just Jim mindlessly buying. No, I mean, it's just, and they had an end cap that was strictly toys that had been designed off of the dinosaurs that are featured in Camp Cretaceous. And more to the point, I mean, that huge new park that Universal is building in Texas is going to have a Camp Cretaceous land. I mean, this is I would argue as important a franchise for Universal as the actual Jurassic World movies are. In fact, we're getting another one of those next year.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's really huge. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, come, you'll hear me, you'll see me, we'll talk, we'll show an episode. It'll be a lot of fun. So yeah, come on down Sunday.
And speaking of Jurassic World, Jurassic Park, one of the gentlemen who helped design the dinosaurs featured in that original film, the Spielberg back in, I want to say, 93, 94. That was William Stout, who, by the way, is one of only 5 people on the planet who have been to every single San Diego Comic-Con. And he will be there at booth 4803. That's down aisle 48. With, by the way, my co-host of Looking at Lucasfilm, Brian Gahn. And so if you want to meet with a guy who does great dinosaurs, or for that matter, a guy who does a decent job of hosting a Lucasfilm podcast, head to booth 4803. But again, Bill's been going to. And I think I'm lucky enough to know another guy who also it's one of the 5. Mark Evanier of News From Me. He's been going to San Diego since 1970 to attend these things. And speaking of the 1970s, on the second half of this week's show, Mr. Taylor and I are going to be talking about some animated features that Disney almost made back during that decade, including an alternate version of The Rescuers that was set entirely in the city of New York. But first, the news. And as always, the news portion of Fine Tuning is brought to you by TouringPlans.com. If you're headed on to Central Florida anytime soon to sample some of the theme parks that can be found around the city beautiful, well, Touring Plans can help you save time. More importantly, can help you save money as you wander around Disney World and the Universal Orlando Resort. So please check them out at TouringPlans.com. Okay, to now pivot to what's going on at the box office, which, how do you feel about all of these stories in the trades about how this is the summer of animation and animation has turned it all around for us?
It annoys me greatly, Jim, because animation is always saving the box office, and it's especially obnoxious when they refer to it as like family films or kid films. It's like,
thank you.
I don't know. I don't think little Jimmy is buying the tickets himself, but whatever you say. Yeah, I mean, it's really discouraging, and of course, animation is going to be bringing us through the new year with Moana 2, Transformers 1. There's so many animated things coming out. I mean, yeah, it's it ruffled my feathers, Jim. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. I wanted that voice and that observation. That said, though, Inside Out 2 continues to chug along at the box office. 574 million in ticket sales in North America so far, 784 million overseas, so 1.35 billion worldwide, which makes this Kelsey Mann movie the highest grossing Pixar film ever. Incredibles 2 previously held that title when that Brad Bird movie was first released in theaters back in June of 2018. It grossed a total at the end of its box office around 1.2 billion. And by the way, just in case you're wondering, the Incredibles franchise as a whole, including the original, which again released to theaters in November of 2004, has grossed 1.9 billion to date, whereas the Inside Out franchise as a whole, including the original, that one was released, the Pete Docter movie, back in June of 2015. Those two movies combined have earned 2.2 billion. Very impressive numbers, but did you see the news about what the Despicable Me franchise has done?
Yeah, I think it crossed the $5 billion mark earlier this week.
It did.
And I think it's now the second most successful animated franchise of all time. Is that right?
Well, now it's interesting you say that because and it then becomes, what's the unit of measure? Because, for example, I'd always thought that the Ice Age movies were the highest earning, because I've always heard the number $6 billion associated with those films, but it turns out theatrically they've made only 3.2 billion, but if you factor in all of the merchandise, all of the clothes, that sort of thing, so the math gets a little interesting. But strictly from a box office point of view, evidently the Despicable Me movies, if you add in the Minion films to the pile, they're now the highest grossing. They're 5 billion. Shrek comes in second. That's 4 billion, 20 million. Toy Story, that franchise, is in third place for animation. That's 3.27 billion. Then again, Ice Age 3.2, and then finally Frozen with 2.7 billion. But Drew, look, all of these box office totals and these positions are going to shift over the coming years, because, well, for example, we've got Toy Story 5 being released to theaters June 19th of 2026. We've got Shrek 5 arriving in theaters just, am I doing that right? 12 days later? Shrek 5 is coming out after, oh God, okay. And then Minions 3, which...
That's always been the structure of these things, is that the Pixar movie comes out in June, and then a Universal movie or something comes out right after. And it's always worked. I mean, Despicable Me is not suffering from following Inside Out by any stretch of the imagination. So
that's an excellent point. I just, again, there's just, I don't know why. And you're right. This is the pattern that is held forever.
Yeah.
But there's still a part of me. It's like, oh my God, they're gonna cannibalize each other. It's like, no, they are not. Now, where this gets interesting is that February 2024, during an earnings call, Bob Iger let slip that I guess they were looking at a November 2026 release date for Frozen 3, but that's never been officially announced or confirmed, right?
No, I've actually heard that there's an original being slotted into that
Okay.
date. So I would say, D23 is just around the corner.
Thank you.
Say keep an eye there.
Okay.
But speaking of D23 and speaking of Pete Docter, did you see that his book is going to be there? The Directing at Disney, the original directors of Walt's animated films, which he wrote with Don Perry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you'll be able to get that first at the little publishing booth, and it comes out in September. He's been working on this, as you know, Jim, for a while. So
In fact, on the second half of today's show, we're going to be talking a lot about the folks he mentioned, especially Wooly Reitherman.
Yes.
Anyway, getting back to Ice Age, which held the number 4 position on that best grossing animated film franchise list. We got the Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild back in January of 2022. That went straight to Disney Plus, and this, of course, was after Disney announced in February of 2021 that it would be shuttering Blue Sky Studios. But what intrigues me is, you've heard the same things, right? You've heard that Disney is thinking about reviving Ice Age. I mean, at the very least, bringing these characters into the parks.
Yes, a park that will be widely discussed at D23 in just a few weeks.
Okay.
You and I have heard the same things, right?
There we go. Go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll be circling back on this story, folks. Beyond that, we were talking about Minions 3 for I want to say July of 2027. That news broke just last week. Again, I want to say when we recorded that show, in fact, I think, Drew, you mentioned you had just seen the news come over the transom about Shrek 5. So you're not wrong. That is their sweet spot, at least as far as Universal is concerned. That July 4th weekend.
Yep.
So now, okay, we talked Disney, we've talked Universal, want to give Warner Brothers a little love, and we got the news, I want to say just yesterday, about Bad Fairies, but this is Warner Brothers partnering with Locksmith Animation, right? The folks who did Ron's Gone Wrong for Disney 20th Century back in October of 2021?
Yes, and this is something that had been on the calendar, it had been off the calendar, and it was discouraging because it would pop up and then go away. But I think the pedigree of this thing is pretty awesome. It is going to be directed by Megan Nicole Dong, who created Centaur World, for Netflix, which I thought was great. And the music is going to be by Toby Marlowe and Lucy Moss, who co-created the Tony Award-winning musical 6. And they have a new musical called Why Am I So Single that is premiering on London's West End next month. So they are doing the songs for it. And there is a Grammy-nominated musician named Isabella Summers who worked with Florence and the Machine, and she is producing the score and producing the songs. And the animation is handled by D-Neg, who we love. So, yeah, really, really exciting.
And just to give folks some idea of what Bad Fairies is supposed to be about, the logline says that this is a subversive musical comedy set in contemporary London about this badass gang of fairies who break every rule in the book. So given the creatives you just described, all right, this sounds like something definitely to seek out when it arrives in theaters on July 23rd, 2027, just 3 weeks and change behind Minions. But as Drew pointed out, that's not really a problem, Jim, so calm down. Get off the ledge. Nobody's worried about
one animation, it all snowballs into the next, and everybody makes every studio exec gets to trumpet their $1 billion grossing animated film, and I look forward to the trade articles in 2027 saying, is this the year for animation?
Okay. Now, just one last point to bring up here. Okay, if we pivot now to again, summer of 2026, we have Toy Story 5 coming out on June 19th, and then 12 days later, we have Shrek 5 opening at theaters July 1st. What kind of intrigues me about this is it will have been 8 years since Toy Story 4 opened at theaters in June of 2018, and 17 years since Shrek Ever After in May of 2010, though I guess we do need to factor in Puss in Boots, right, from last year.
Yeah, and we need to factor in Lightyear, too, which came out in 2022.
Okay, all right, there we go.
Yeah.
All right, so long story short, I do all this research, and Drew knocks it over. So that it's a good partnership. Okay. Oh, by the way, speaking of DreamWorks movies, Amazon just delivered my copy of The Art of Kung Fu Panda 4 yesterday. Handsome book. Really. It made me actually want to circle back on watching the movie. That they did a beautiful job of talking about how what's kind of different about this movie is the what is it, Juniper City? This is the first one really in an urban setting, so to speak. But yeah,
did you never see it?
I have it here at the house. It's sitting there in a DVD.
Oh boy,
I don't know if I know how to use my DVD.
It's great. It's really good. It's I loved it. I thought it was really great.
Okay.
Yeah, Mike Mitchell did a great job. He's such a stand-up dude.
There we go.
We go. Really great.
Okay, now we were just mentioning that Drew will be down at Comic-Con on Sunday, hosting the Camp Cretaceous panel. But in the past, you've done a number of events at Gallery Nucleus, and I just got a note from them earlier this week. They're now doing pre-orders on The Art of El Tigre, the Adventures of Manny Rivera.
Oh yeah, I think I might be hosting that too. Actually,
cool. Okay, so
yeah.
It's so interesting. I get control of the television 20 minutes before Nancy and I go to bed. And there is this movie on one of the family channels that I've seen now about maybe an hour of. It's called The Guardians of Oz. Have you ever seen this? Because
no, what is this?
Jorge evidently designed the characters. It's his take on the Wizard of Oz characters, and I mean, the writing is not great. The animation is okay, but the characters design is spectacular. It is so much fun, and to see his version of the Cowardly Lion, who looks like he came out of Furiosa, just sort of. It's just great stuff. So again, as soon as I heard that this hardcover book is coming out, and by the way, if you order it through Gallery Nucleus, you can get it signed by Jorge and Sandra. So, but that's now available for pre-ordering for $39.95. And speaking of books, just want to remind folks that The Art and Making of Ultraman is coming from Titan Books in December of this year. And The Art of Amphibia coming from Disney Manga, March of 2025. And both of those are written by my co-host here. So, and Amphibia, of course, is set in a world of swamps, and Rescuers was set down in Devil's Bayou. And by the way, this was not the only movie that Disney was looking to set in the swamps of the South back in the 1970s, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, this.
This episode is brought to you by Dragon Ball Legends, the mobile fighting game. Dragon Ball Legends is the first card-based fighting mobile game based on the widely popular Dragon Ball anime series. This impressive game, based on the adventures of the Dragon Ball characters, has high-quality 3D graphics and authentic voice acting. Relive your favorite moments and fight scenes with epic cinematic. From Kid Goku to Beerus, you can collect and train all your favorite characters. The game allows you to collect them all, from all Dragon Ball sagas, including Dragon Ball Super. Fight with Goku, Add them to your team and use the intuitive controls to battle players around the world in friendly matches. Challenge your friends, compete in leagues to rank up the leaderboard, and defeat powerful foes in co-op. Are you ready to become a legend? Download Dragon Ball Legends for free on iOS or Android.
And we're back. Okay, so we've been talking a lot lately about Disney animation history, and I have to admit the 70s fascinate me for Disney because it was this very weird time. It was Walt was gone. He died in December of '66, and the Jungle Book came out in October of '67. And for a while there, Drew, that was going to be it. I mean, I don't need to tell you about how close Disney feature animation came to shutting down back in the late 50s, early 60s. I mean, when Sleeping Beauty came out in February of 1959 and barely covered its $6 million production cost, and that thing had been in production since Cinderella came out in theaters in 1950. Walt was, all right, that's it. Just we're not gonna make movies like that anymore. So there were massive layoffs. On the other side of that, only a fourth of the staff remained, and Walt basically committed to just one more animated feature, and that was 101 Dalmatians. But even then, there were all of these sort of creative concessions to the effect of, all right, we have to find a way to do this faster and cheaper. And that's where xerography came in, the process of literally scanning the animator's drawing onto a piece of acetate, which could then be painted. And you've heard the same thing I've heard, Drew, right? The effect of Walt hated the look of 101 Dalmatians, that are just, he hated that the part of the xerography. He liked how the hand inked cells looked. They had a much cleaner line. He felt like you could see all of the artist's effort in xerography.
Yeah, I think Lloyd Norman told me that story because he worked on. Yeah,
so
I think that the xerography look is very charming. But
I agree. I agree. But at the same time, you have to understand that here's Walt Disney. Here's the guy who did Snow White, Pinocchio, Bambi, arguably the height of the form, and here he was now making 101 Dalmatians, which luckily did well enough at the box office that Walt was like, all right, we'll do one more. And that was, of course, Sword in the Stone, gets released at theaters in December of '63. And then in that same window of time, you have the, of course, Jolly Holiday scene from Mary Poppins, which weirdly becomes the breakout scene from the movie. People just talked about, oh my God, that scene with Dick Van Dyke and Julie Andrews and the Pearlies and them in the farmyard. And so again, Walt's like, all right, I guess we're going to do one more. And that one.
Well, we should say that he was so checked out of Sword in the Stone that the animators drew Merlin to look like Walt, and he didn't even notice.
Yeah.
Right? He was so,
Yeah, that's that.
They were like, is he ever going to say anything? No, never did. Never did.
And by the way, that was written by Bill Peet, as was 101 Dalmatians, and Bill had become kind of Walt's go-to guy. So now Jungle Book goes into development. And Bill's take on this adheres much more closely to the original Rudyard Kipling story. And he shows it to Walt, and Walt's like, that is too dark. We cannot do that. And Bill is like, well, this is the film I want to make. And Walt says, well, we're not going to make that movie. And Bill Peet walks out the door of Disney in 1964. And we get this weird moment, Drew, where Walt, and again, Drew used the proper phrase. Walt had checked out from animation. In fact, that was the thing with Sleeping Beauty, the notion of that being shot in 70 millimeter and the moving tapestry. And Walt was just taken too long. This is too boring. And so he just stopped going to like the daily animation meetings. He would come in once a week to sort of review what was going on. And so that was the thing. He hadn't been really hands-on in animated film for more than a decade at this point. And he was kind of personally offended by Bill Peet leaving, and Bill Peet basically saying, look, this is the only animated movie you can make out of this Rudyard Kipling story. And Walt's like, well, the hell with that. I'm gonna do what I want. I'm gonna prove that guy wrong. And well, you know the famous story about him having the meeting with the Shermans about the Jungle Book, and he sits Robert and Richard down and basically says, see this book, don't read it. Here's the story I want you to do.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is
I learned all about this, Jim, at the Walt Disney Family Museum when I went to the great
That's right.
Andreas Deja curated Jungle Book exhibit a couple of years ago, which was really fantastic.
By the way, we've been talking about wonderful making of books, and they made a spectacular book for that exhibition, which, by the way, is still available from the store at the Walt Disney Family Museum. All right. Anyway, Walt actually starts attending daily animation sessions again, and he's very hands-on with this movie. And again, it's Floyd Norman.
Can we talk about his one great story note that really hasn't haunted the movie at all for all of these decades, which was that the Vultures originally all sang parodies of Beatles songs or songs in the style of Beatles songs, and he said, cut it out. Barbershop Quartet is here to stay. The Beatles are a flash in the pan. And for whatever reason, they couldn't redo the dialogue, but they could redo the songs. So that's why we have those awful Barbershop Quartet parodies in Jungle Book when we could have had really fun Beatles parodies. And obviously, the Beatles have long outlived our beloved Barbershop Quartet.
You were not wrong. You were not wrong. But Floyd tells this great story about they finally got the movie locked. They figured out the story. I mean, probably the last meeting Walt had was the Beatles, flash in the pan, get them out of the movie. But Floyd described this moment where, it's the last meeting. Okay, well, let's make that movie. And Walt sort of hung in the doorway for a moment and was like, I forgot how much fun this was. And then he was gone. Just sort of like this was how he used to make his living at Disney. He used to make animated features, but now he's the theme park guy and now he's the television guy. Well, all right. Anyway, Walt obviously gets sick. We lose him in December of '66. But before that, Ken Anderson went to Walt, and he had done some concept art. There was this script that had actually been developed as a two-part TV episode for the the Wonderful World of Color TV show, and it was about this butler and this maid who worked for this eccentric heiress, and she was going to leave her fortune to her cats, and the maid and the butler conspired to kill the cats but let them loose in the Paris countryside, and kind of the incredible journey too. They made their way back from the countryside to the city with the help of an alley cat. You know the story. You've seen the movie. Well, but Ken had done some drawings and said, I know you were thinking about doing this for television, but I think there's an animated feature here. And Walt basically gave his blessing. It's like, all right, yeah, sure, go off, do that. Let's see if there's a movie there. And so that was the lifeboat. The people who were working at Feature Animation, who since '59 had each time as well, Walt said, we can do one more. And it's like, oh, we're going to do one more. And especially on the heels of Jungle Book coming out in October of '67 and doing huge box office. So it's like, all right, we're going to do one more. So they animate The Aristocats. It comes out in December of 1970. It does good at the box office. It's kind of slight. In fact, what's kind of interesting these days, if you go over to Disney Plus, this is one of those handful of Disney movies that actually has the warning about racial depictions because of what is it, Paul Winchell's Siamese cat. It's like, wow, okay. It was a different time, folks. It was a different time. But now it's just one of these things where it's like, okay, what do we do next? What do we do now? Because the Aristocats at least had supposedly Walt's blessing, but now the old maestro is gone. So what do we do now? And the thinking in house was, all right, well, should we do something tried and true? Should we do something familiar? Should we do something we've done previously? And it's like, sure enough, Disney had in 1952 released a live action version of, it was actually called The Story of Robin Hood. Was one of those movies like Treasure Island that had to be shot in the UK because Disney, it was post-war, and England was like, yes, all of the money that from ticket sales for Disney films, you can have that. You just have to spend it here inside of our country. So they made the Robin Hood movie there. But Ken, this is what fascinated me about Ken Anderson. I mean, he'd worked at Disney from the late 30s, and as he recalled, the happiest time in the history of the company was when they were making Song of the South.
Ooh!
There we go. There we go. All right. So they shot the live action in Phoenix in December of 44. And the animation, and there's 25 minutes of animation in Song of the South. They did all of that in 45. And it was a particularly happy time because World War II was winding down. And so a lot of the artists that had left Disney to serve the country were coming home. And so suddenly a lot of the A-list animators are back on the payroll and they're doing amazing work. And so that, to Ken's way of thinking, that was a really happy time. And I'd like to revisit that. So what Ken proposes is like, how about, what if we think of this new animated version of Robin Hood as Song of the South 2? With the idea of we set it in the American South of the 1930s. So it's going to be set in Nottingham, Mississippi. And with the notion of, but you do it with an all animal cast. And in fact, what's kind of interesting is if you can chase down an early copy of the Christopher Finch book, the Art of Walt Disney, there's a whole chapter in there that talks about the development of Robin Hood, because it was the animated feature they were working on at that time while Christopher was pulling together the book. And you can see a lot of the art that they did for this set in the American South version of Robin Hood, where you had like the sheriff of Nottingham literally is a pig. And then somebody's like, I don't know how law enforcement is going to feel about that, Ken. Could we maybe have another idea there? And so he does him as a ram. In fact, what's kind of interesting is if you look at the ram that Ken designed and you look at the rams that showed up in Zootopia, very, very similar.
Yeah.
But anyway, even then, the company was having second thoughts about Song of the South. It's during this period, Drew, that we see the very first conversations about maybe that needs to go into the vault and not come out. So it's really not a surprise that Ken developed this southern version of Robin Hood. And he said, merry old England. Let's go with merry old England. So that comes out in November of 73, and it's a troubled production. It's famous today for the number of recycled pieces of animation for what?
Yeah.
Snow White and Jungle Book. And I mean, it's almost an eye test of a movie, particularly if you're an animation fan. It's like, name the different Disney films this has been pulled from. But Woolley Reitherman, the director of it, flat out said, we don't have people in the building anymore that can do that. People are retiring. People are leaving the company. We have to reuse footage if we're going to have a scene like that in this movie. And it's not a coincidence that this comes out in November of 73, but we see starting in 1975, that's when the Cal Arts character animation program gets underway. I mean, it was just Disney was staring down the barrel of, wow, we are coming to a time when we won't have people who know how to do this, and we won't be able to produce just one more movie. So we need to invest in our future. So let's get some kids trained in this. But at the same time, the thinking of the studio was, all right, maybe the other reason that Robin Hood wasn't the movie that we wanted to make is that, well, first of all, the hero was bland. And I mean, think about it. When what do you remember from Robin Hood? You remember the villains. You remember Peter Ustinov's Prince John, and you remember Terry Thomas's Sir Hiss. So the thinking was, all right, maybe for our next movie, let's not set it in the deep past. Let's do something contemporary, like maybe set something in American City. And so now, mind you, back in 1959, Marjorie Sharp wrote The Rescuers and then wrote a sequel in 62 called Miss Bianca. Disney buys the film rights to this series that same year, 1962, and they begin developing a movie based on it. But I don't know if you've read either of the original books, for the Sharp books, Drew, but it's Bernard and Bianca basically trying to rescue a political prisoner who's behind the Iron Curtain. It's a touch political, you know. So, and Walt was like, no, let's put this one on the shelf for a while. And they make another run at it in 1968. Again, in that window of time where it's just sort of like, we should probably be thinking about what we're doing after the Aristocats. But again, 74, they dust it off again, and they come up with, they decide, they pull a Jungle Book. You know, first thing is, don't read the book. We're going to make up a story. And in this case, it was a polar bear in the children's zoo in Central Park in New York. But the interesting thing is, the polar bear was being targeted by none other than Cruella de Vil.
I've heard about this. Yes. Go on.
Well, again, she evidently she'd done her time in London and had left for the United States, but she's still a fashion enthusiast. And this season, Dalmatian fur is out and all white polar bear fur is in. So this is all about how she's scheming to get the polar bear out of the children's zoo at Central Park. And so the Rescue Aid Society gets word of this, and they're going to try to rescue this or save this polar bear from Cruella de Vil. But where this gets interesting is Milt Kahl, who at this point was kind of the senior animator at Feature Animation. He had been tapped to do the villain, and Milt had actually been very competitive with Mark Davis back in the day, and Mark, of course, had left Feature Animation after doing Cruella for the original 101 Dalmatians. And Milt just felt, I don't want to do Mark's character. I want to do my own character. If I screw up Cruella, people will call me on it. So he proposed a different character, the Grand Duchess, which what I love about this is, and this is such 70s Disney, they had lined up Phyllis Diller to be the voice of the Grand Duchess. But at the same time, they had also lined up Louis Prima, King Louis, to be the voice of the polar bear. And eventually everybody was looking at this movie and it's like, it's too silly. And at the same time, Wooly Reitherman, who was sort of the de facto director, and it was like, guys, we're overthinking this. We just need a simple story. Give me a little girl. Give me a little girl who has to be rescued by two little mice. And we'll work backwards from that. Now, what's kind of interesting is if you actually watch the Rescuers movie, which was released in theaters in June of 77, Bernard, because they had spent so much time and so much damn money working on the zoo version of the Rescuers, that there's a moment in the movie where Bernard and Bianca are looking to take a shortcut through the zoo, and you get to see just a little bit of what they developed, and then you hear a lion roar, and then they run out of the zoo, and we'll go the long way around. But anyway, it's Ken now who sees his opening. It's like, okay, little girl being rescued by mice. We need to put her someplace interesting. How about the American South? How about a swamp, Devil's Bayou? And okay, yeah, they do that. And that comes out in June of 77, does huge business. And then in November of that same year, we get Pete's Dragon. Which, by the way, Ken designed Elliot, the dragon, for that film. And now it's like, all right, we have to make a decision. What are we doing next? And where this gets fascinating is there are 3 books that Disney has optioned the rights for. There is Paul Gallico's Scruffy, which is about the Barbary apes, the macaques, that hang out at the Rock of Gibraltar. And this is kind of a leftover from Bedknobs and Broomsticks. And when I say that, it's, how Bedknobs and Broomsticks has Eglantine Price defeating the Nazis? That's evidently what happened with Scruffy as well, that it's set during the war years, and it's only because of the macaques at the Rock of Gibraltar that the Allies won. It's like, okay, that's interesting.
I can see the movie poster now, Jim. It's all coming clear.
What's interesting, and you just talking about D23, you hammer on Disney and Scruffy. There is a piece of concept art that was evidently offered at a D23 panel at the last event. And again, if you hammer on eBay, or every so often a storyboard or that sort of thing will bubble up from this movie. And also, by the way, art from the film, or the proposed Disney film we're about to talk about, Catfish Bend. Well, we've seen this stuff turn up at Van Eaton auctions. I mean, the idea here was, this was Ben Lucien Berman's series of books about stories set in the South with raccoons and turtles and weasels, and again, very, very much in the Song of the South vein. And Ken did all of this work on this movie. I mean, yeah, and Disney had optioned the rights, and he was determined that this, finally, we didn't do it on Robin Hood, but we're now going to return to the world of the Song of the South, and everybody's going to be happy at the studio because they're going to love working on this movie. And it did not date well, I guess is the polite way of putting it, that by 1977, a movie set in this world, Southern dialect, that sort of thing, just didn't fly at Disney. And the company, very politely but very firmly, because Ken had been at Disney for 40 plus years at that point, was like, no, we're not making this movie. Ken, thank you for your efforts, but no. And he was so disappointed, he retired from Disney in early 1978. I mean, he looked at what the studio had decided to go with, The Fox and the Hound, and it frustrated him, because it's like, well, isn't that set in the South? And it's like, yeah, but not Song of the South. So,
well, is that why there's that Splash Mountain reference to Catfish Bend in the attraction?
Yes, there we go.
Okay,
there we go. And
yeah.
In fact, there are a number of people within the company who, when they were talking initially about, I mean, face it, when they decided to base Splash Mountain on Song of the South, I mean, that was very controversial. And I think we talked previously on the show that Eisner actually ordered them to put Song of the South back out into theaters in October of 86 with the express notion of, basically told the Imagineers, if I get one letter about how racist this movie is. We're not going to do that project, and they didn't. They didn't get a single letter of complaint. And so Eisner was like, okay, you can make your flume ride, but the default position was going to be if they couldn't get Eisner to okay Song of the South, and they basically wanted it because they wanted the song catalog, but it's just sort of like, well, if that doesn't work out, we do have Catfish Bend. And we didn't make the movie, but we did option the book, and we could do something here. But yeah, that's why you get that Catfish Bend reference, because there's a lot of people at the studio, and given how the animation studio and Imagineering were kind of porous at the time, they were aware of what was going on with that project and how it didn't go forward. But
we could have had a Catfish Bend ride, Jim, and we wouldn't have been shrunken down to the size of a frog.
Have you actually made it over to Disneyland yet? No, wait a minute. That one hasn't opened yet. Okay.
It hasn't opened yet.
That hasn't opened.
But I have heard about the animation in the ride, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. That it was done by Walt Disney Animation Studios, but it's a different art style than the upcoming Tiana show.
Is it really?
And it's a different art style than the movie. Mm-hmm. So it's just sort of an exclusive experience there. It's very weird.
I wanted to talk to you about this because what's interesting to me is you watch that party finale scene and you have a number of, like, you have the character of John Goodman, Big Daddy, done in CG. And remember, when Princess and the Frog came out in 2009, it was the return of hand-drawn animation at Disney. And I mean, it's not like they haven't done this before. There's that Snow White walkthrough that's in the storybook castle at Shanghai.
And there was also Little Mermaid.
There we go.
That moment where she's transforming.
Yep.
Yeah, that they actually redid in 2D. Mm-hmm. After some
they did
blowback.
Yeah. And likewise, I don't know if you've seen any of the footage from the new Peter Pan ride for Fantasy Springs at Tokyo Disney Seas, but I mean that all looks gorgeous. But I have to admit, I'm intrigued when Disney revisits a character that you've previously only seen in hand drawn and does it as CG, but that's interesting, really. So the animation for the ride, different style than Tiana the series, and by the way, do we have a ballpark yet?
We don't yet. I'm sure we'll be getting one at D23, and because you know what, the thing about D23 is everything that they announce at D23 comes to pass. You know, that's what I love about it. There's never any deviation, Jim. There's never any canceled projects. You know, we're all enjoying Gigantic today as we speak after hearing a song and seeing a sequence from that film at D23. So, yeah.
You're breaking my heart here, Drew. You're breaking my heart. So
you and I will be sitting side by side,
there we go,
hands on each other's thighs, watching all of this unfold. Yes, yeah.
No doubt, the Honda Center. Okay, well, but before we do that, Mr. Taylor and I have to go to our separate corners and work on other stuff. So, and speaking of other stuff, seriously, folks, if you are not listening to Drew's Light the Fuse podcast, you are missing out on some truly amazing stories. In fact, what's been especially fun these last couple of months is that you've been revisiting a lot of your back catalog on that show, you and Charles, right? And
yeah, we have that's what we're doing right now. I mean, hopefully it keeps going. Mm-hmm. You know, obviously Paramount is in a new position.
Yeah.
They have new business daddies, and we have to see what our business daddies want us to do. But
I would imagine that, you know, they want to stay in the Light the Fuse business. Wasn't I just seeing casting news about Mission Impossible 8 earlier this week?
Yeah. We'll see, Jim. But please enjoy the old episodes. Wish for the best. Hopefully we'll keep doing our thing. Yeah.
Okay. And speaking of podcasts, we have a few of them here that you might enjoy listening to. We have of course Disney Dish that I do with Len Testa. We have Looking at Lucasfilm, which I do with Brian Gahn. In fact, he and I will be recording a brand new episode of that tomorrow after I watch the final episode of The Acolyte tonight. Let's see. We, of course, have our epic Universal podcast that I do with Eric Hersey, who edits a lot of the shows here and produces them. In fact, he and the family are down at Universal for their very first visit right now, and sent me a funny
Wait a
note
minute. You've been doing a Universal podcast with someone who had never been to Universal?
That's
an interesting approach.
It actually turned out to be, and in fact, you'll love this. That I got a note, an instant message from him. I want to say like 3 or 4 days ago, and it's like, so the podcast continue. I really like this place, so it's like, oh, okay, good that it worked out. And speaking of Eric's bride, Lauren, she and I do a Disney merch podcast. I want that too. And also, we have recently begun hosting Manufacturing the Magic, which Shelley and Noah Valladolid do, which is a wonderful look at the centuries-old history of themed entertainment. And of course, we have the video series Len and I are doing with veteran Imagineer Jim Schul, Disney Unpacked, which this month we have been taking a close look at when Paradise Pier was transformed into Pixar Pier. And I think that's going to do it. Oh, quick favor here, folks. If you can head over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review not just the show you're listening to right now, Fine Tuning, but also Light the Fuse. That would be very helpful to myself and Drew. Beyond that, there is, of course, social media. And where can folks find you these days, Drew?
Drew Tailored, like a tailored shirt, on Instagram and Twitter. You know, I like to support the platforms that actively are contributing to the death of democracy, Jim. So I'll be right there on Twitter until the bitter end, when you and I are going at each other with sharp sticks. I'm there. So yeah, follow me.
He's making friends left and right. Okay, yes, I am also still on Twitter, X, whatever they call it. Likewise, Instagram is Jim Hill Media, and over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. All right, folks. So when we get back, the timing is going to be interesting on this, Drew, because you'll have just gotten back from San Diego Comic-Con, and you'll have like 5 minutes.
No, we have one more episode before I go to Comic-Con. Because we'll record this weekend, probably. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're not getting rid of me that easy.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, we'll have to figure that out. But in the meantime, thanks for listening, folks, and Mr. Taylor and I will be back soon.